Survival Guide for Extreme Situations, by Bear Grylls. This book centered on the philosophy of hope for the best, prepare for the worst, using the author's traumatic personal experiences with practical knowledge to demonstrate how readers should respond when encountering the numerous dangers lurking within the magical world. What particularly captivated Sherlock was the comprehensive wilderness survival guide contained within the book, alongside Bear Grylls' personal accounts of facing dangerous creatures alone like trolls, the water-dwelling grindylows, vampires, and the bloodthirsty vampire bats. Each tale was recounted with such detail that made Sherlock's pulse quicken with a mixture of fascination. After spending some time examining the book's contents, Sherlock made his decision without hesitation and purchased it. At the conclusion of his essential supplies list, printed in bold crimson letters, was a special reminder that had immediately attracted his attention. First-year students are not permitted to bring their own broomsticks. This particular restriction had naturally piqued Sherlock's curiosity from the moment he'd first read it. He had never been one to follow rules with blind obedience. His analytical mind always sought to understand the reasoning behind regulations. He had no worries about bending or breaking rules when logic and necessity demanded it. Flying broomsticks were an unknown variable in his calculations. Whether there existed any genuine necessity to have such an item remained unclear, but his logical nature demanded that he at least understand the true nature and capabilities of these mysterious objects before making any decisions. Quality Quidditch Supplies. Located on the bustling north side of Diagon Alley, Quality Quidditch Supplies displayed an array of broomsticks suspended in mid-air, rotating slowly to showcase their craftsmanship. It was here that Sherlock finally encountered the legendary flying broomsticks in person. As their name said, these were not ordinary household cleaning tools but sophisticated magical instruments capable of soaring through the skies with grace and speed. Throughout the wizarding world, they served as the primary means of transportation for magical folk. Beyond just travel, these remarkable devices were used in various competitive sports that drew passionate crowds from across the magical community. For someone like Sherlock, whose insatiable curiosity about unknown phenomena had driven him since childhood, such revolutionary magical technology was utterly irresistible. However, his enthusiasm was considerably dampened when he began investigating their prices, which were absolutely astronomical by any reasonable standard. Entry-level flying broomsticks, suitable for beginners but lacking advanced features, had prices starting at 1 to 200 galleons, a sum that represented the absolute upper limit of currency that non-magical families could legally exchange in a single year through Gringotts Bank. The truly exceptional flying broomsticks, prestigious first-tier brands like the sleek Nimbus 2000 with its responsive handling and the reliable Clean Sweep 7 known for its stability, actually had prices exceeding 1,000 galleons each. The enthusiastic shop owner, a middle-aged wizard whose eyes sparkled with genuine passion for his goods, explained that for students attending Hogwarts, flying broomsticks were used far beyond just simple transportation. Their greatest use lied in participating in Quidditch matches. That was a sport similar to football. The main difference from the former was that the field moved from ground to air, with some additional rules. It could be stated without exaggeration that throughout the magical world, almost everyone had some affection and enthusiasm for Quidditch. However, after carefully weighing various practical and financial considerations, Sherlock ultimately declined the shop owner's increasingly enthusiastic sales pitch, despite the man's confident claims that he could provide discreet methods for first-year students to secretly smuggle flying broomsticks past the school's security measures. During their continued shopping trip, Sherlock once again found himself tactfully persuading his well-meaning mother to select a practical pewter cauldron over her initially preferred option. Mrs. Holmes, whose generous nature often led her toward extravagant purchases, had originally set her heart on buying a pure gold cauldron that gleamed magnificently but offered no practical advantages beyond its impressive appearance. "Mother," Sherlock had reasoned patiently, "while the gold cauldron is undeniably beautiful, the pewter option will serve the exact same functional purpose at a fraction of the cost, leaving us with additional funds for other necessary supplies." Apart from the strict prohibition against bringing flying broomsticks, the school supply list also informed new students that they were permitted to bring one animal companion: an owl, a toad, or a cat. The knowledgeable pet shop owner, a kindly witch whose small shop overflowed with cages, tanks, and perches housing various magical creatures, provided fascinating historical context for these choices. According to her experience, toads had enjoyed tremendous popularity many years ago, representing the height of fashion among young wizards. "You see," she explained while gently stroking a particularly plump toad, "while toads possess no inherent magical abilities themselves, they serve as absolutely excellent subjects for practicing spells and testing the effects of various potions. Their unique physiology makes them particularly valuable for aspiring potion makers, as their porous skin readily absorbs liquids, making it significantly more convenient and practical to test potions that require oral consumption. Unfortunately, as she said with a hint of melancholy, times and preferences had shifted dramatically over the decades. Toads were no longer considered fashionable or desirable companions among the current generation of students. Cats had their own set of complications. While they were good at their traditional role of catching mice and other small pests that might plague dormitories, they frequently triggered severe allergic reactions in sensitive peoples, making them problematic choices for shared dormitories. Therefore, owls emerged as the overwhelmingly superior choice for most students. These magnificent birds provided unparalleled utility, serving as reliable postal services capable of delivering letters and packages across vast distances. However, Sherlock's practical mind immediately recognized the basic economic factors influencing this apparent consensus. In his assessment, the preference for owls stemmed largely from their higher cost, 15 galleons each, compared to pet cats averaging 10 galleons and toads that could be purchased for single-digit prices. Despite his recognition of these commercial motivations, Sherlock nevertheless chose an owl. The bird's ability to facilitate long-distance communication alone justified the expense, particularly given the isolated location of his future school. Next came the portion of this magical shopping expedition that interested Sherlock most, the buying of a wand. Throughout the whole of Diagon Alley's bustling commercial district, only one shop specialized in wand crafting and sales. Compared to the other vibrant, well-maintained shops that lined Diagon Alley with their gleaming windows and fresh paint, Ollivander's appeared small and shabby, as though it had remained unchanged for centuries. A single wand rested on faded purple velvet cushioning in the dusty window display, and the once golden lettering on the old door had peeled and faded significantly, though the words remained readable. Ollivander's, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. The deliberate lack of renovation was perhaps intentionally maintained to emphasize and authenticate the impressive 382 BC founding date, Sherlock immediately theorized, his instincts analyzing even the shop's aesthetic choices. When he pushed open the door and stepped across the threshold into the shop's interior, a delicate tinkling bell announced their arrival. Sherlock's sharp gaze immediately conducted a comprehensive survey of the shop's layout and contents. The interior space was remarkably compact, containing no furniture whatsoever except for a single long wooden bench positioned in the far corner. Thousands upon thousands of narrow rectangular boxes containing wands were meticulously stacked from floor to ceiling along every available wall surface, and a thin layer of undisturbed dust had settled over most surfaces. Just as Sherlock completed his initial assessment, a soft voice spoke from the shadows. "Welcome." The speaker was an elderly man whose most striking feature was his extraordinary silver-white eyes that seemed to shine like two brilliant moons in the shop's deliberately dim lighting. His hair matched his eyes in color, and his movements possessed the careful precision of someone who had spent decades handling delicate, powerful objects. Intelligent, confident, lonely, compassionate, approximately 55 years old, recently finished serving another customer. The moment Sherlock's gaze fell upon Ollivander, his mind automatically catalogued these observations with the same systematic precision he applied to all his deductions. Simultaneously, Ollivander gave a knowing smile and addressed Sherlock and his accompanying parents. "It appears we have a young wizard from a Muggle family visiting us today." Sherlock's eyebrow arched slightly at these words, marking the second occurrence of the term Muggle during their magical shopping trip. The first had come from Tom, the sociable proprietor of the Leaky Cauldron. Based on the contextual usage, this term clearly refers to ordinary people from non-magical families, but the implications and potential cultural connotations require further investigation. "Which arm do you typically use for your wand?" Ollivander's direct question interrupted Sherlock's analytical thoughts. "Right hand," Sherlock responded without hesitation, then paused thoughtfully before adding, "left hand as well, if circumstances require it." Ollivander looked at Sherlock with surprise, his eyes widening slightly. Throughout his many decades of operating the shop and fitting countless young wizards with their first wands, he had never heard such a response. After recovering from his momentary astonishment, he still prioritized the wands by requesting that Sherlock extend his right arm and began the traditional measuring process with meticulous care. The measurements proceeded from shoulder to fingertip, from wrist to elbow, from knee to armpit, covering every conceivable dimension with thoroughness. During this fascinating process, Sherlock observed with considerable surprise that the measuring tape operated entirely independently, moving and adjusting itself without any visible magical guidance. However, considering that he now found himself fully immersed in the magical world, he rapidly adapted to this supernatural phenomenon. When conventional explanation proved inadequate, magic elegantly filled the explanatory gap. While this scene merely struck Sherlock as unexpected but logically consistent within magical powers, for Mrs. Holmes the experience was absolutely thrilling. "This measuring tool is simply wonderful," Mrs. Holmes thought with increasing excitement. "I absolutely must inquire about acquiring one later. With such an instrument, creating properly fitted clothing for both Sherlock and Tarquin would become infinitely more convenient and precise." Following the completion of the measurements came the wand selection phase, a process Sherlock had naively assumed would be straightforward and efficient. He never could have anticipated that the time subsequently spent in this attempt would exceed even his mother's legendary marathon shopping expeditions at London's most general department stores. 9 inches, willow wood, produces a whooshing sound when properly waved, an absolutely excellent wand for precision spellcasting. "Please, try waving it," Ollivander said, presenting the first candidate with ceremonial seriousness. Sherlock accepted the offered wand, noting its surprising lightness and the subtle warmth that seemed to emanate from the polished wood. However, before he could even attempt the suggested waving motion, Ollivander swiftly snatched the wand away. Sherlock. What precisely was the meaning of this abrupt behavior? "Try this alternative. Mahogany wood, 10¼ inches in length, notably more flexible in its responsiveness," Ollivander said before Sherlock could voice his confusion, already extending a replacement wand with determination. This time Sherlock did manage to execute the recommended waving motion, but the wand produced absolutely no reaction whatsoever. No warmth, no sparks. Another option, unicorn hair core, ebony wood construction, excellent elasticity, measuring precisely 9¾ inches. Various items from the nearby shelf suddenly flew outward in random directions, clearly indicating this wand was also unsuitable for Sherlock. Ash wood with phoenix feather core, 7½ inches. Black walnut embedded with dragon heartstring, 8 inches exactly. Time continued passing gradually in this increasingly repetitive manner, with each failed attempt adding to the growing pile of rejected wands and Sherlock's rising fascination with the complex science of wand compatibility. Ollivander's wand shop. Sherlock tried wand after wand, yet none seemed suitable for him. Faced with this situation, Ollivander showed not a trace of impatience. On the contrary, he became increasingly excited. Sherlock said nothing, just began cooperating passively with the shopkeeper's selections, maintaining an appearance of great patience. Mr. and Mrs. Holmes exchanged glances with each other. The main issue was that neither understood what kind of wand would be most suitable in Ollivander's mind. In their view, Sherlock had barely grasped each wand, let alone wave it. He hadn't even had time to lift it, before this peculiar old man snatched it away. This situation had already occurred several times. Finally, Mrs. Holmes couldn't help but speak up, quietly suggesting to her husband, "Tarquin, perhaps we should look elsewhere?" Mr. Holmes was also somewhat hesitant, "But I heard this is the only shop of its kind." "Ha!" Unexpectedly, Ollivander's hearing was exceptionally keen. Though his attention had been focused on Sherlock the entire time, he now looked up. "Is this lady questioning the Ollivander family?" Under his sharp gaze, Mrs. Holmes felt somewhat nervous. "No, I was just—" "No need for such trouble. The Ollivander family has been crafting wands since 382 BC. No matter how particular a customer might be, they can always find a suitable wand here." "Including the previous customer who left?" Sherlock suddenly interjected. Ollivander was momentarily stunned, then laughed aloud. What a perceptive young wizard indeed. Yes, there was indeed a particular customer earlier, quite a famous figure, ha. At this point, Ollivander seemed to realize something and changed the subject. Rather than saying wizards choose wands, it's actually the wands that choose their wizards. Remember, no one leaves Ollivander's disappointed. Oh! At this, he slapped his forehead and walked to the shelf from which goods had earlier flown out, retrieving a plain-looking black wand from the corner. Beechwood and serpent nerve, 12 inches, resilient and flexible. "Try it." Sherlock naturally noticed Ollivander's topic change. He didn't ask further questions, but accepted the wand as suggested. The moment he grasped this wand, his heart couldn't help but shiver. A mysterious, indescribable feeling suddenly appeared, as if something had connected him to this wand in his hand. He waved it gently, and a white smoke ring appeared, drifting slowly away. Not only that, but he seemed to hear the sound of ship horns and sailors' laughter nearby. It was as if he had achieved some resonance with the wand. How marvelous! Even without understanding magic, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes could see this was a wand suitable for Sherlock. Did this wand choose me? When Ollivander handed over the wand in its box, Sherlock asked. Yes, the wand chooses the wizard, that's the correct answer. Having finally selected a wand for Sherlock, this particular customer, Ollivander appeared quite pleased and explained further. For the true match of a beechwood wand, if they're already an adult, they must be reasonable and experienced. If they're a young person, Ollivander glanced at Sherlock, revealing a meaningful expression, then it represents wisdom beyond their years. Wisdom beyond his years. Sherlock pondered thoughtfully. At this time, Mrs. Holmes also stepped forward to inquire about the self-measuring tape. However, she received the answer that non-wizards couldn't use it. This inevitably left her somewhat disappointed. After paying 8 galleons, Mr. Ollivander bowed and escorted them out of the shop. 2 particular customers in one day. This year's Hogwarts is sure to be lively. Watching the family of 3's retreating figures, he murmured to himself. After purchasing the wand, Sherlock and his parents finally concluded their shopping trip in Diagon Alley for the day. With careful spending, the items on the school list cost nearly 80 galleons in total. Including the additional books purchased, Sherlock had less than 20 galleons remaining. Mrs. Holmes felt that restricting magical currency exchange was discrimination against non-wizard families like theirs by the magical world, and she brooded over this for quite a while. However, under Mr. Holmes's persuasion, she eventually abandoned the idea of filing a complaint, and the family successfully returned from Diagon Alley to the Leaky Cauldron. Just as they were preparing to drive home, Sherlock paused. He noticed an adult couple with a young girl wandering between the bookstore and record shop. With just one glance, Sherlock determined this was a married couple with their daughter, and their purpose was the same as theirs had been not long ago. Sherlock's action caught the attention of Mr. and Mrs. Holmes. Following his gaze, they naturally saw the family of 3 wandering between the bookstore and record shop. The husband and wife were neatly dressed and refined in appearance. The little girl had thick brown curly hair and was chattering about something. Though they lacked Sherlock's observational and analytical abilities, it wasn't difficult to guess that they too were looking for the Leaky Cauldron. Mrs. Holmes was a warm-hearted person. Thinking of their own recent experience, she immediately pulled her husband forward. Clearly, she intended to help. Sherlock understood this clearly. With that young witch present, this family would certainly be able to find the Leaky Cauldron eventually. But he hadn't expected that just because he had looked once more in the crowd, his mother would actively get involved. Seeing that his parents had already struck up a conversation with his family, he could only join them. Indeed. You're also looking for Diagon Alley, aren't you? Today's experiences had filled Mrs. Holmes with confidence, and she quickly assumed the dominant role in the conversation with the authority of someone who had been there. Oh, I bet you the goblin's attitude at the bank is absolutely terrible, just like Aunt Susan's apple pie next door. Mary Mother of God, they only gave us an exchange limit of 128 galleons. Refusing to make money, how foolish! If I see them again, I swear I'll kick their backsides with my boots. Mrs. Holmes's words quickly closed the distance between them. After mutual introductions revealed that the couple named Granger were also non-wizards like themselves, she excitedly pulled Sherlock forward. Sherlock, this is Miss Hermione Granger, also a new student at Hogwarts. You can look out for each other. Mrs. Holmes was indeed helpful by nature. But this was only one reason for enthusiastically helping the Granger family. As a mother, she naturally understood her son's personality all too well. Solitary, eccentric, antisocial. She had already been troubled by this at his previous school. Although Sherlock had resolved this problem himself, the final result could hardly be called pleasant. So, if she could help him make friends before entering school, it would be wonderful indeed. Meanwhile, Sherlock had already greeted the little girl called Hermione. Out of politeness, he also said to Mr. Granger, "Dr. Granger, pleased to meet you." "Pleased to... Wait, how do you know I'm a doctor?" Mr. Granger instinctively responded, but suddenly realized something was wrong. He hadn't mentioned his profession during his self-introduction. Mrs. Granger and Hermione, with her bushy brown hair, were also stunned. Seeing the Granger family's surprised expressions, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes exchanged smiles. They weren't surprised at all, of course. After all, similar incidents had occurred many times before. However, Mrs. Holmes soon couldn't smile anymore. Because Sherlock didn't directly answer Mr. Granger's question, but turned to Mrs. Granger instead. "Mrs. Granger, I actually suspect my mother has pulpitis caused by tooth decay, but she's been afraid to go to the hospital because of the pain. I hope you can help her." Mrs. Granger's eyes lit up, and she immediately began inquiring about Mrs. Holmes's symptoms. Though Mrs. Holmes glared at Sherlock, she still cooperatively began describing her condition to Mrs. Granger. When Sherlock was brought forward, Hermione Granger had already begun observing him. Sherlock had short black hair, gray eyes, and was taller than his peers, quite conspicuous at first glance. Hearing him directly state her parents' professions surprised her greatly, and she couldn't help but look at him several more times. That's when she noticed his rather prominent hooked nose. So big. When Sherlock's sharp gaze turned toward her, the discovered Hermione couldn't help but blush and quickly turned her head away. The Granger family had arrived rather late. Although the two mothers got along well, the Grangers still had to leave first to quickly purchase Hermione's school supplies. However, before parting ways, Mrs. Holmes not only helped them confirm the location of the leaky cauldron, but also unreservedly shared her shopping experience from the day with Mrs. Granger. At the same time, Mrs. Granger persuaded Mrs. Holmes to have a comprehensive periodontal health check before the official start of school. The painless kind, guaranteed. Thus, the day in Diagon Alley came to a perfect conclusion. Over the following month, Sherlock was quite productive. He didn't give much thought to the Granger family. His mother's pulpitis was indeed an unexpected bonus. As for looking out for each other with Hermione at school, that was unnecessary. Sherlock had always considered taking care of himself a troublesome affair. As for having Hermione take care of him, that was even more impossible. Besides, with a young witch in tow, where would he find time to explore Hogwarts? During this period, he carefully studied how to use his new pet. After several attempts, he discovered that, as the pet shop owner had said, owls could both deliver letters and send packages. It seemed no different from a postman, but the speed and accuracy were far superior. He also gave his pet owl a name, Watson. Sherlock couldn't say exactly why, but he felt this name was suitable for a long-term companion. Besides this, he had also finished reading all the textbooks and the additional books he had purchased. Through them, Sherlock finally gained a systematic and comprehensive understanding of the wizarding world. Compared to Hermione Granger, this young witch, he was more interested in two other names. One was Harry James Potter. Whether in the school-required reading lists, A History of Magic, or in the additional books Sherlock had purchased, Important Magical Events of the 20th Century, and The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, this name was mentioned. This boy, the same age as himself, was born on July 31, 1980. He was called the Boy Who Lived, the savior of the wizarding world, the only one to defeat the Dark Lord. As for why Harry Potter had these titles, it was related to another name, the Dark Lord whom Harry Potter had defeated. According to the book's descriptions, this was the most powerful and dangerous dark wizard in history. So much so that when his name needed to be mentioned, many books simply referred to him as He Who Must Not Be Named. Only very few books would actually use the name Voldemort, and even then, usually only once. When they needed to refer to him again later in the text, it would change back to You-Know-Who or the Dark Lord. Sherlock, who believed firmly in science, found this somewhat incomprehensible. This was truly rather absurd. Perhaps this was just a characteristic of the wizarding world? In any case, due to Voldemort's great power and numerous followers, he had once ruled the wizarding world. For the entire magical community, that was the darkest period in history. However, where there is oppression, there is resistance. The dark, oppressive rule aroused increasing dissatisfaction, and finally, a prolonged war broke out between good and evil. The person leading the White Wizards in their great battle against Voldemort was none other than Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This was also why Hogwarts and Dumbledore himself held such high status in the magical world. This war was called the Wizarding War, and it lasted a full 11 years. The entire wizarding world suffered greatly during this conflict. According to the book's descriptions, if this war had continued, Voldemort might truly have conquered the wizarding world. However, in the 11th year of the Wizarding War, when Voldemort's power was at its peak, a turning point appeared. October 31st, 1981, Halloween night. For unknown reasons, the terrifying Dark Lord came to Godric's Hollow. It was a small village in southwest England, a semi-wizarding settlement named after the famous wizard Godric Gryffindor. Harry Potter and his parents lived there. Without question, the Potter couple were excellent wizards. They were powerful and had once been active on the front lines against Voldemort. Even so, when confronting Voldemort directly, the Potter couple were mercilessly killed without suspense. After killing the Potter couple, Voldemort pointed his wand at 15-month-old Harry Potter. But then, the supremely powerful Dark Wizard who had personally killed hundreds and struck fear into the entire wizarding world actually failed. The powerful magic that had once been unstoppable blew the Potter house to ruins, yet Harry himself remained unharmed. Thus, Harry Potter became the first and only person to survive Voldemort's attack. You know who, the Dark Lord, Voldemort disappeared. All that remained was Harry Potter and the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. To this day, no one knows the reason. Regardless, the fact that the Dark Lord who had dominated the wizarding world was defeated by an infant was undeniable. With this, the 11-year Wizarding War was declared over, and the wizarding world was finally free from darkness and terror. Because of this, Harry Potter became a household name as a hero before he had even grown up, revered as the boy who lived. Some even proposed making the day of Voldemort's disappearance Harry Potter Day. Of course, this request was ultimately not realized. But this didn't diminish Harry Potter's special status in the wizarding world. According to Wizarding World customs, Harry Potter, the same age as Sherlock, would also be starting school this summer of 1991. Undoubtedly, compared to Hermione Granger, Harry Potter's appeal was far greater for Sherlock. So, after learning this history through books, Sherlock made a decision. After starting school, he would quickly approach Harry Potter and use this important figure as his breakthrough point for understanding the wizarding world. Sherlock had no doubt that if the world he lived in were a novel, then Harry Potter, if not the protagonist, would certainly be a very important character. As long as he stayed with him, various conflicts and contradictions would surely come to him continuously. That would make understanding the entire wizarding world much more convenient. Moreover, compared to adults like Albus Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall, making a breakthrough through Harry would undoubtedly be easier. Of course, this was relatively speaking. After all, given Harry Potter's household fame in the wizarding world, he would probably be a star figure at school. There might even be a group of young admirers bustling around him, so approaching him wouldn't be too easy. However, the more challenging it was, the more interesting it would be. Finally, September 1st arrived. On this day, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes together escorted Sherlock to King's Cross Station. Hogwarts was in the Scottish Highlands. This was Sherlock's deduction, which had also been confirmed by Professor McGonagall. But to get there by train, how to put it? Using Mr. Holmes's joking evaluation, taking a train to wizard school seems rather ridiculous. Have they used up all their magic carpets? What the couple found even more incomprehensible was that the train ticket showed Sherlock needed to board the 11 o'clock train departing from platform 9 3/4. As everyone knew, London's King's Cross Station only had platform 9 and platform 10. There had never been any platform 9 3/4. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall was a competent faculty member. While carefully explaining to Sherlock how to enter Diagon Alley, she had also told him how to find this seemingly non-existent platform 9 3/4. 10 o'clock, King's Cross Station. One platform bore a large plastic sign with a number 9, another bore a large plastic sign with a number 10, and naturally, there was nothing between them. But Sherlock knew that platform 9 3/4 was behind the barrier wall between the two, requiring special means to enter. The moment of parting had arrived. Mr. Holmes smiled and waved farewell to his son continuously. Mrs. Holmes, however, turned away, her shoulders shaking constantly, clearly not wanting to face this moment of separation. As an emotional person, such a reaction was not surprising. Mr. Holmes fully demonstrated the responsibility of a family head. After waving goodbye to Sherlock once more, he tightly embraced his wife's shoulders and left. Sherlock, watching his parents depart, was in no hurry to run at the wall. He first curiously reached out to touch it. It felt solid, not a false illusion. He knocked on the bricks, and the thud 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 sounds proved it wasn't hollow either. Looking down, obvious footprints and cart tracks led straight into the wall's other side. From the stride length, these people had been forceful and hurried. A slight smile appeared at the corner of Sherlock's mouth. Now it seemed that even without McGonagall's instructions, he would know what to do. Sherlock guessed that wizards had specifically added this setting of requiring a fast collision to enter to prevent non-wizards from accidentally entering through light contact. There was nothing more to say. Face the wall, quicken pace, charge. Sherlock didn't close his eyes, yet still felt darkness approaching. But this lasted only an instant. Soon, his view opened up. Directly ahead were empty railway tracks and a platform crowded with passengers. Looking back, what had been the barrier wall was now a wrought iron archway with large letters reading, Platform 9 3/4. Interesting. Sherlock showed a genuine smile. He had originally thought the owl mail delivery was a prank. He never imagined it would be the key to opening the door to a new world for him. Sherlock was certain that starting from this Platform 9 3/4, he wouldn't feel bored for a very long time to come. Since he had arrived a bit early, the Hogwarts train hadn't yet arrived. Sherlock could only wait on this long platform. While waiting, he wasn't idle but observed these wizards who would soon become his schoolmates, analyzing their histories and backgrounds. This way, the long wait wasn't entirely boring. New student, mother is a witch, father is an ordinary person in the demolition industry who only learned of his wife's identity after marriage. Returning student, rich in desire for performance, outgoing personality, strong expressive ability, often serves as a host. New student, parents absent for unknown reasons, raised by grandmother, forgetful, timid, lacking confidence. Just as Sherlock's gaze moved away from a round-faced boy and his grandmother and began searching for the next target, a deep red steam locomotive came roaring in, with a sign reading, Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. The moment the train arrived, everyone surged forward. The steam locomotive, now stationed at the platform, sent out thick smoke that swirled above the crowd. Soon the first car was packed with students, then the second, the third. Students boarding the train either leaned out windows to talk with family, or played around in their seats, or sat in place looking around curiously. The atmosphere was filled with joy. Sherlock was in no hurry to board. His target hadn't yet appeared. Until then, he would continue waiting, even if the wait was very long. Finally, when he saw a thin, frail boy pushing a heavy trunk alone onto the platform, Sherlock's eyes showed satisfaction. Finally, I've been waiting for you. Harry Potter was at his wits' end. His usually harsh Uncle Vernon had, for the first time ever, driven him to King's Cross Station and even helped push his heavy trunk into the station. Harry had initially been puzzled by Vernon's sudden kindness, but when he saw there was no Platform 9 3/4 to be found, he immediately understood. No wonder Vernon had run off so quickly. He had deliberately abandoned him here. With no other choice, Harry mustered the courage to ask a guard for help. Although Harry didn't mention Platform 9 3/4 specifically, he was still scolded for causing trouble, mainly because he couldn't even explain where Hogwarts was located. When he learned that there wasn't a single train departing at 11 o'clock, he felt utterly helpless. Fortunately for him, he encountered a kind wizarding family. With their help, Harry finally managed to reach Platform 9 3/4. However, because he arrived so late, the train was nearly full. Harry could only struggle through the crowd and found an empty compartment near the rear of the train. He tried to lift his trunk onto the step, but being so thin and weak, and with the trunk being so heavy, he failed twice, the case crashing down on his feet both times. At this point, he couldn't worry about the pain in his feet. He took a deep breath and made a third attempt with all his strength. Unsurprisingly, he failed again. At the crucial moment, a strong hand steadily caught the trunk, preventing it from crushing Harry's feet a third time. Harry looked up to see a face that made an immediate and striking impression. "You need help." The other person lifted the trunk onto the step with ease and gave Harry a smile. Harry had grown up in an environment of bullying and oppression, both at home and at school. At home, he didn't even have his own room. His uncle and aunt had always made him live in a spider-infested storage cupboard under the stairs. Whenever he caused trouble, he would be punished by being denied meals, and he was constantly bullied by his cousin Dudley. At school, Harry had no friends either, again because of Dudley. As the school bully, Dudley was tyrannical to the extreme. He was the only one bold enough to pull pants of someone in public, and was the only one others would help pull up his trousers after they wet themselves. With everyone knowing that Dudley hated Harry most of all, no one was willing to oppose Dudley's gang. In such an environment, Harry naturally developed a withdrawn personality. However, at this very moment, Harry would have bet that the smile on this boy's face was the most pleasant smile he had ever seen in his life. Whether it was his distinctive gray eyes, his Roman nose, or the way he effortlessly solved the trunk problem, everything made him seem extraordinarily reliable. The last time Harry had felt this way was on his birthday, when the giant Hagrid had brought him his Hogwarts letter and told him he was a wizard. "I'm Sherlock Holmes, a first-year student. And you?" While Harry was still in a daze, Sherlock had already extended his hand. "Hello, Holmes. I'm Harry Potter, also a first year." Harry was so nervous that he extended both hands when meeting Sherlock. But he quickly realized how foolish this looked and hastily withdrew one hand. He simply had so little experience with social interaction that he was terrified the other person might laugh at him. Sherlock would never do such a thing. Even for Sherlock, finding Harry Potter, whom he had never seen before, on an entire train full of people wasn't an easy task. Fortunately, Sherlock had arrived early enough to give himself ample time to rule out those waiting on the platform beforehand. This way, he only needed to focus his attention on people who had just entered the platform. Even so, Sherlock was somewhat surprised. When he spotted Harry, he found that Harry had come alone and didn't look to be in very good condition. This fact made Sherlock momentarily doubt whether he had found the right person. Even if Harry had lost his parents, given his status in the wizarding world, it wouldn't be strange for 10 or 8 people to see him off, would it? Yet here he was, arriving completely alone. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So, Sherlock understood. This hero who had saved the wizarding world hadn't grown up in the wizard's world, but had remained in the non-magical world. This made Sherlock even more interested in Harry. "Just call me Sherlock." Sherlock shook hands with Harry. "It's crowded up front, so let's sit here. Potter, or may I call you Harry?" "Ah, yes, of course." Harry nodded instinctively. When he came to his senses, he found that Sherlock had already seated him by the window in this compartment. Then Sherlock brought in all of Harry's luggage and also placed his own pet owl, Hedwig, on the rack. Being so thoroughly taken care of by Sherlock, whom he had just met, Harry felt no resentment. Instead, his heart felt much more at ease. Taking his first step into the magical world, he was panicking inside and desperately needed such a brotherly figure. He even had a bold thought deep in his heart. It would be wonderful if he could always stay with Sherlock like this. Compared to his cousin Dudley, this reliable-looking new classmate was what a real brother should be like. If Sherlock hadn't said so himself, Harry would have thought he was an upperclassman. After the two had settled in, Sherlock looked Harry over once more. "It seems you haven't been living very well." Just that one sentence filled Harry with an intense desire to confide in someone. Seeing Sherlock's encouraging eyes looking at him, he poured out all his experiences over the years. At this moment, Sherlock was a competent listener, nodding continuously and occasionally asking follow-up questions. After their conversation, Sherlock had gained a more comprehensive understanding of Harry. He was even more interesting than Sherlock had imagined. "So, you're saying your uncle brought you to the station today and then left on his own, but fortunately you were lucky enough to get help from others and finally managed to get here?" "Exactly. I was wondering why he suddenly became so nice." "Wait, how did you know that?" Harry was speaking when he suddenly felt something was wrong. He looked at Sherlock in shock. "I only said I've been living with relatives all these years, but I never said it was my uncle. And how did you know I couldn't find the platform and had to get help from others?" Sherlock was already accustomed to Harry's reaction. Initially, he had enjoyed this feeling too. After explaining his reasoning process in detail and seeing others' surprised and admiring looks, a sense of superiority would arise in his heart. But after experiencing this many times, Sherlock had become so used to such reactions that he found them boring. Now, He only found this ability commonplace and not worth praising. Anyone who trained seriously could reach his current level. But others obviously didn't think so, like Harry right now. Looking at his expression, Sherlock knew that if he didn't explain these things clearly, their friendly conversation wouldn't be able to continue.